The diner was quiet that morning. Coffee cups clinked against saucers, the low hum of conversation mixing with the hiss of the grill. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary. Another corner diner in a city that had long since stopped noticing. Places like this. But the man sitting in the back booth was not ordinary. He owned the place, and no one knew it. Not the customers, not the waitstaff, not even the manager. He had come undercover, dressed in plain clothes, to see his business through the eyes of those who actually kept it alive. And that's when he noticed her. A waitress, maybe mid-20s, moving quickly between tables. Her left hand was wrapped in a bandage, swollen, stiff. She carried plates with awkward precision, her face calm but her body telling another story. Pain. Every movement winced across her shoulders, but she pushed through, determined not to let it show. The undercover owner leaned forward. He knew something wasn't right. A diner is fast, hot, relentless. It devours the weak and grinds down the tired. You don't last long with an injury unless you have no choice. And that thought lodged deep in his chest. Why was she still here, working like this? He watched closely. The other staff barely noticed her condition, or maybe they'd just grown. Used to it. The manager barked orders, customers snapped their fingers impatiently, and she, with a broken hand, carried on. Here's what that moment teaches us. In life, suffering often hides in plain sight. Not because people are blind, but because we train ourselves not to see what makes us uncomfortable. Her injury wasn't invisible. It was ignored, but he couldn't ignore it. Something told him there was more beneath the surface. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet endurance that morning would unravel a truth powerful enough to shake the diner's walls, test the integrity of leadership, and expose the hidden fractures in the system that demanded so much from her while giving. So little back, the undercover owner set down his coffee. His investigation had just begun. Her name was Aaliyah, 26, a single mother of one. To most customers, she was just another face bringing plates of eggs and coffee, but behind that apron was a story no one in the diner truly saw. Aaliyah had grown up in the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The blocks where streetlights flickered and grocery stores vanished years ago, leaving behind only corner shops selling what they could. Her father had worked 3 jobs until his body gave out. Her mother, a caretaker for other people's children, had little left for her own. From the start, Aaliyah understood one thing: survival required sacrifice. When she was 19, she got pregnant. The father disappeared before the baby was even born. And so, while her friends explored college dreams, Aaliyah was stacking shifts, learning how to stretch every dollar and carrying a child who depended on her. The diner became her steady anchor. The pay was low, the hours long, but it was something certain in a life where nothing else was. And here's the truth most people miss. For millions of workers, certainty matters more than opportunity. Stability, however fragile, can feel safer than risking it all for a better life. But certainty came at a cost. The diner was demanding, rushing plates, rude customers, endless hours on her feet. She had endured burns from hot plates, cuts from broken glasses, insults from strangers who looked at her but never saw her. And then, just last week, she slipped while unloading crates in the storage room. Her hand slammed against metal shelving, fracturing a bone. The doctor told her she needed rest, maybe even surgery. But rest? Surgery? That was luxury. Missing work meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant rent unpaid, food scarce, her son going without. This is the silent pressure of poverty. The body screams for healing, but life screams louder for survival. So she showed up, bandaged hand, forced smile, shoulders heavy with the weight of a choice no one should have to make. The undercover owner, though he didn't know her full story yet, could see the outlines of it. He saw the stiffness in her walk, the way her eyes dimmed when the manager criticized her pace. He had built this business, but now he was beginning to wonder, at what cost? Here's what that moment teaches us. Behind every act of quiet endurance is a history of unspoken battles. Aaliyah wasn't weak. She was carrying more than most could imagine. But the very system that depended on her strength had no mercy for her struggle. And the truth, this was only the beginning of what he would uncover. Because soon, Aaliyah would be forced into a choice, one that would reveal not just her resilience, but the moral cracks in the world around her. That afternoon, the diner was packed. The lunch rush hit hard. Plates flying from the kitchen, voices overlapping, every table full. The air felt heavy, as if even the walls were sweating. Aaliyah moved through it all with a kind of quiet determination. But the bandaged hand slowed her down. She could balance 3 plates with her good hand, but carrying coffee pots, writing orders, and clearing tables took longer. Customers began to notice. The manager noticed, too. "Pick it up, Aaliyah," he snapped loud enough for others to hear. "We don't have time for your excuses." She bit her tongue, eyes burning, but said nothing. She needed this job. And in that silence, something deep inside her tightened. Here's the moral fork in the road. Do you speak out against injustice and risk everything? Or do you endure quietly, hoping survival itself is enough? For Aaliyah, the choice wasn't abstract. It was practical. If she spoke back, she could lose her job. If she quit, rent wouldn't be paid. But if she stayed quiet, she taught her son, and herself, that suffering without dignity was simply the price of survival. And here's the truth about moral dilemmas. They rarely announce themselves with clarity. They slip in, disguised, as everyday choices. Keep your head down, or raise it. Take the insult, or risk the consequence. That day, the undercover owner kept watching. He saw the moment when Aaliyah's lips trembled, when she almost spoke. Almost. But then she swallowed it down. She chose silence. For now, she didn't know it yet, but that single action, the choice to endure instead of explode, would set in motion a chain of events that flipped the entire outcome of her life in this diner. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. Late that evening, after the rush had died down, Aaliyah moved through the diner with deliberate care. She cleaned tables, reset silverware, and refilled the sugar jars, all with one good hand. To the manager, it looked like slow, clumsy work, but the undercover owner noticed something different. She wasn't just working, she was adapting. With her injured hand bandaged tight against her chest, Aaliyah had restructured her rhythm. She used her hip to nudge open the kitchen door, her elbow to balance trays against her body, and even her broken hand, when no one was watching, to steady plates with sharp, excruciating control. She had turned pain into precision. Here's what most people missed. Resilience isn't loud. It's not the grand speeches or heroic poses we see in movies. Real resilience is quiet. It hides in problem-solving, in the creativity born from necessity. The undercover owner leaned back in his booth, observing carefully. It was subtle, but he could see the way she memorized customers' preferences without writing them down, how she smoothed over rude remarks with grace, how she carried dignity into a space that offered her none. She didn't know it yet, but this was her hidden power. Not strength in the physical sense, but a psychological endurance, an emotional intelligence sharpened by years of carrying weight most people couldn't see. And there was another layer. While bussing tables, Aaliyah paused by an elderly couple struggling to split the bill. She gently leaned down, whispered something, and adjusted their check. No one else noticed, but the owner saw the relief in their faces, the quiet gratitude. She had chosen humanity over policy, compassion over rules. That's when it struck him. She's keeping this place alive, and no one even knows it. Here's what that moment teaches us. Intelligence isn't always measured in diplomas or titles. Sometimes it's measured in how a person endures suffering without letting it corrode their character. Aaliyah was living proof. But the world has a way of testing even the strongest. And the very next week, that test would come. Brutal, public, and almost enough to break her. The following Friday was the busiest night of the month. Paychecks had just cleared, and the diner overflowed with tired workers looking for comfort food and laughter. The air smelled of grease and coffee, the kind of atmosphere that could feel warm to a customer but suffocating to the staff. Aaliyah was stretched thin. Her broken hand throbbed under its bandage. She had downed 2 ibuprofen before the shift, but the pain still burned up her arm like fire. Still, she kept moving. She always did, until the moment she couldn't. At 7:42 p.m., the kitchen sent out a massive order. 4 heavy plates stacked high with burgers and fries. Aaliyah balanced them carefully against her good arm, pressing one plate awkwardly into her bandaged hand to steady the load. She took 3 steps toward the crowded tables, and then disaster. The plate in her broken hand slipped. It hit the floor with a crash so loud the entire diner went silent. Food splattered across the tiles. Grease and ketchup streaked her uniform. For a moment, time froze. Customers stared. Children laughed. A man in a suit muttered, "Unbelievable." And then came the manager. He stormed out from behind the counter, face red, voice raised for everyone to hear. "Are you kidding me, Aaliyah? Do you know what this costs us? You can't even carry a few plates? Maybe this job isn't for you." Her eyes widened, breath caught in her throat. She wanted to explain, to say her hand was broken, that she had been carrying the weight of this job and her life with more strength than anyone in that room could imagine. But the words stuck. And so, in front of a full diner, Aaliyah stood humiliated. Customers averted their eyes. Some shook their heads. A few whispered, "She's probably careless." No one stepped in. Not one. The Undercover owner clenched his jaw. He had seen enough. Here's what that moment teaches us. Systems fail not in grand collapses but in small cruelties that go unchallenged. Injustice doesn't always wear the face of hatred. Sometimes it wears the face of indifference. The customers who look away, the co-workers who stay silent, the manager who chooses profit over people. And that night, under the fluorescent lights of a cheap diner, Aaliyah absorbed all of it. Her body trembled, her face flushed, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to breaking. The question was simple but terrifying. Would this be the moment she gave up? She didn't know it yet, but this breakdown was also the beginning of something far greater, because out of humiliation often rises resolve. and the spark of transformation was already waiting for her. That night, after her shift, Aaliyah sat alone in the back alley behind the diner. The air was damp with drizzle, her uniform stained with ketchup and grease, her hands trembling from both pain and humiliation. For the first time, she allowed the tears to fall. She had survived so much: eviction notices, unpaid bills, nights of hunger, but somehow public humiliation cut deeper. It wasn't just the broken plate, it was the way people looked at her as if she were disposable, replaceable, less than, and in that moment of collapse, something inside her shifted. The back door creaked open. She stiffened. But it wasn't the manager. It was the quiet man from the booth, the one who had been there all week, taking notes on a small pad, observing everything. He approached carefully, voice low and calm. "You handled yourself with dignity tonight." She looked up, startled. "Dignity? I dropped food in front of everyone. They laughed at me." He nodded. "Yes, but you didn't lash out. You didn't crumble. You endured. That kind of strength? Most people don't have it." She narrowed her eyes, studying him. "Why do you care? You're just a customer." The man paused, then spoke words that would change everything. "I'm not just a customer. I'm the owner." Her breath caught. For a second, she thought he was joking, but his gaze was steady, unshaken. And then he told her what no one else had. He had seen everything. Her endurance, her quiet intelligence, her ability to carry this place on her back while others looked away. He saw her. Aaliyah felt something stir. Not pride, not relief, but recognition. For the first time, someone in power acknowledged her pain as real, her labor as valuable. But he didn't stop there. "Listen," he said, leaning closer. "You have a choice. You can keep letting the system break you, or you can step into your own power. Not by fighting louder, but by moving smarter. Pain has been shaping you into something sharper. Use it." Here's what that moment teaches us. Transformation rarely begins in triumph. It begins in brokenness, when the old way of enduring is no longer enough. The collapse creates space for something new, and in that alley, under dim streetlight, with rain dripping from the awning, above, Aaliyah felt a spark ignite. Not anger, not despair. Resolve. She wiped her face, stood slowly, and nodded. "Then, let's change this." The Undercover owner smiled faintly. The plan, though neither of them knew the full shape of it yet, had just begun. The following week, Aaliyah walked back into the diner with a new steadiness. Her hand was still injured, her uniform still the same, but something in her presence had shifted. The Undercover owner hadn't announced himself publicly. He didn't fire the manager on the spot. He didn't sweep in with grand gestures. Instead, he gave Aaliyah something far more powerful: knowledge. He showed her how to keep detailed notes of everything happening inside the diner: missed breaks, unpaid overtime, health code violations, and the ways staff were being mistreated. It was quiet work, invisible to most. But every shift, she was building a record, a map of truth that could not be ignored. At the same time, he coached her in resilience strategy. "Don't just endure," he told her. "Learn to direct the weight." When a customer snapped at her instead of swallowing the shame, she responded with calm, assertive clarity. When the manager barked orders, she followed, but logged each instance. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was documenting, preparing, and outside of work she began something new, teaching her son about dignity. At bedtime she told him stories, not of superheroes or kings, but of ordinary people who stood their ground in quiet ways. She wanted him to see her not as a victim, but as someone who chose strength without losing compassion. Here's what that moment teaches. Us, strategy often looks like patience. The world glorifies dramatic victories, but true transformation grows in silence first, like roots spreading underground. Weeks passed. Aaliyah's co-workers began to notice her composure. She smiled more, but not the forced smile of survival. A sharper one, like she knew something they didn't, and slowly they began to gravitate toward her. Sharing frustrations, whispering about unfair schedules, asking, quietly, "What are you writing down?" She didn't tell them everything. Not yet, but the seed was planted. The Undercover owner watched from his booth, satisfaction hidden behind his coffee cup. Change was moving, slowly, quietly, like a tide that no one notices until it swallows the shore, and soon it would. Because the day was coming when silence would end, and the system that humiliated her would face its reckoning. It happened on a Saturday morning. The diner was full, the kind of crowd that made the floorboards hum beneath every step. The manager was in rare form, pacing, barking orders, tossing complaints like darts. To him, it was just another day of control. But this day was different. The Undercover owner had chosen this morning to reveal himself. He sat, as always, in his corner booth, coffee untouched. Aaliyah moved gracefully through the chaos, her hand still wrapped, but her presence unshakable. And then, like clockwork, the moment came. A new waitress accidentally rang up the wrong order, and the manager exploded. He cursed, loud enough for customers to hear, his face twisted with contempt. The room froze. Aaliyah, standing nearby, locked eyes with him, but instead of bowing her head or retreating into silence, she stepped forward. Her voice was steady, calm, but it cut through the air like a blade. Enough. The diner hushed. Forks paused mid-air. Even the grill in the kitchen seemed quieter. She pulled out her small notebook, the one she had been carrying for weeks, and began to read aloud. Every missed break, every time the staff worked, overtime without pay, every violation she had tracked. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't accuse, she documented. Facts, precise and undeniable. The manager's face drained of color. He stammered, trying to laugh it off. "She's making this up." And that's when the Undercover owner stood. His voice was low, calm, but it carried an authority that silenced the room. "No, she's not making it up. I know because I've been here, watching, listening. I am the owner of this diner." Gasps rippled through the room. The staff froze, mouths open. Customers turned, wide-eyed, realizing they had been part of something bigger than a cheap breakfast spot. The manager's arrogance collapsed in an instant. His power dissolved under the weight of exposure. And then came the reversal. The owner turned not to the manager, but to Aaliyah. "This diner does not survive without people like her. She has carried this place with a broken hand, with dignity, with a strength you failed to recognize. From this moment on, things will change." Applause broke out, first hesitant, then swelling. Staff clapped, customers joined in, and for the first time, Aaliyah stood in that diner not as the invisible servant, but as the undeniable center. of respect. Here's what that moment teaches us. Justice rarely arrives with trumpets. It arrives when truth is spoken clearly, when courage meets preparation, and when silence finally gives way to voice. A single action, standing up with evidence, with dignity, flipped the entire outcome. The manager slumped back, defeated. But for Aaliyah, this wasn't just a victory. It was transformation. The diner felt different the very next day. The air, once heavy with tension, carried something else: relief. Staff walked in lighter, shoulders less hunched, voices less guarded. Customers noticed, too. The smiles felt more real, the service less forced. The manager, of course, was gone, quietly dismissed, escorted out after years of unchecked power. For some, it felt like justice. For others, it was simply overdue. But for Aaliyah, the truth was complicated. She didn't rejoice in his downfall. She knew men like him. Men who carried their own scars, who turned their insecurities into cruelty. She understood something vital. Removing one man didn't heal the system. What healed was recognition, accountability, the willingness of leadership to finally see what had been ignored. And that's what changed most. The undercover owner, no longer undercover, gathered the staff together. He laid out new policies, mandatory breaks, paid overtime, stricter protections for injuries. But he didn't stop at rules. He gave them a voice. Monthly meetings where every worker could speak freely. Transparency in scheduling and pay. A shift from fear to fairness. Aaliyah, who once felt invisible, was asked to lead those meetings. She became the bridge between staff and management. Not because she sought power, but because she had already proven she carried responsibility with dignity. And outside the diner, the ripple continued. Her son, once watching his mother stagger home in silence, now saw her return with pride. She told him what happened, how she stood, how the truth mattered, how courage doesn't mean shouting the loudest, but standing, the firmest. Here's what that moment teaches us. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it into fuel for the future. Aaliyah's humiliation had not been wasted. It had been alchemized into change. Of course, there was still cost. Her hand would never be quite the same. The pain lingered, a quiet reminder of the price she had paid for survival. But now that scar wasn't shame, it was testimony. Proof that she had endured, and from endurance, built transformation. The diner thrived in ways it never had before. Not because of better menus or flashy signs, but because the heart of it, the people, were finally seen, valued, and protected. And as for Aaliyah, she carried herself differently now. Not louder, not prouder, simply steadier, like someone who knew the weight of injustice but also the strength of overcoming it. But her story didn't end with the diner, because legacy was already taking root. Years later, people still spoke of that day in the diner, not because of the food spilled on the floor or the manager's outburst, but because of what followed, the quiet moment when truth finally broke the silence. Aaliyah never sought fame. She didn't chase headlines or recognition. But within her son, within her co-workers, within the walls of that diner, she left something more enduring. A culture of courage. And here's the truth. Every space we occupy, whether it's a diner, an office, or a family, is shaped not by the loudest voice of authority, but by the quietest voice of integrity. Aaliyah proved that. Her legacy was not just that she endured. It was that she transformed endurance into influence. That she taught others that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the decision to face struggle without surrendering your humanity. She didn't know it at first, but the broken hand became her symbol. It reminded her, and everyone around her, that sometimes what breaks us is also what awakens us. Here's what that moment teaches us. The systems around us may not change overnight, but they will never change at all unless someone dares to stand, even when standing hurts. So, what about us? We all face diners of our own, places where we are unseen, underestimated, or pressured to stay silent. The lesson of Aaliyah's story is not just to endure, but to prepare, to pay attention, to gather truth, to find allies, and when the moment comes, to step forward. Because one action, grounded in truth, can flip an entire outcome. And now, I want to leave you with this. If her story resonates with you, if you believe that dignity, justice, and resilience still matter in a world too quick to overlook them, then don't just carry this story. Live it. Bring it into your work, your relationships, your communities. And if this story spoke to you, like, comment, and subscribe. Not for numbers, but because stories like this deserve to keep breathing, to keep moving, to keep reminding us who we are when tested. Aaliyah's scar was permanent, but so was her legacy. And maybe, if we choose to live with the same quiet courage, ours will be too.